दिलवाले दुल्हनिया ले जाएंगे।
4 बार देखे।
हम आपके हैं कौन?
कब का हट गया?
रंगीला।
देख ली।
करण अर्जुन। चलना करण अर्जुन देख के आते हैं। शाहरुख सलमान दोनों हैं।
हाथ पकड़ोगे तो?
नहीं पकड़ूंगा।
पकड़ोगे?
माँ कसम नहीं पकड़ूंगा।
क्यों गाल नहीं दबाओगे?
माँ कसम नहीं छूंगा।
तो गोदी में पॉपकॉर्न गिरेगा तो ढूंढोगे नहीं अंधेरे में?
माँ कसम नहीं ढूंढूंगा।
नहीं ढूंढोगे? सट के बैठोगे?
माँ कसम नहीं सकूंगा।
तो अपना अम्मा का साथ ही जाओ ना, हमारा क्या जरूरत है?
Distinguished director Paul Thomas Anderson, who also happens to be a film school dropout, once said, "My filmmaking education consisted of finding out what filmmakers I liked were watching, then seeing those films." Quentin Tarantino's acquaintance to the craft happens to be very similar as well. Prolific writer, director, and producer Anurag Kashyap is a product of the same approach. No wonder that he's a big fan of both Tarantino and Paul Thomas Anderson. A closer look at Anurag's films, set pieces, or recurring motifs give us a clear indication of the rich texture he brings in from his experience of studying cinema. This is Filmcopath's attempt to share that closer look on Anurag cinema with all of you and realize how well his references to international or Indian cinema enrich his films. Before we move on, here's requesting you once again to share and subscribe to our channel. We can keep on working hard on similar content only through your support and participation. Thanks for letting us grow till here. During the release of Urta Punjab, co-produced by Anurag, he had urged the net-enabled audience to hold back from indulging in piracy of the leaked video of the film. He mentioned that, till date, he himself has hardly engaged in torrent downloads, a claim that was instantly challenged on Facebook. Anurag had a fitting response to the challenge. He had invited the person home to visit his personal DVD library. Later, we learned on social media that the person had actually visited one of the largest personal film library in the country, true to Anurag's claim. That is the background to the man's filmmaking sense, the cradle of his cinematic universe. Film posters inside the frame is one of the recurring motifs of Anurag Kashyap. Often they are Kashyap's nod to his favorite filmmakers, as we see in this scene from Gulal. But in Gangs of Wasseypur, the posters are also part of the narrative, a parallel demarcation of the timeline progression of the film. From Kasam Paida Karne Wale Ki at the time of Sardar Khan to the angry young Amitabh Bachchan image that fascinates young Faisal, until Munna Bhai MBBS intrigue of Perpendicular. This is a journey in itself, which depicts the change in the Hindi film industry over time and how the characters imbibe real images of their times into themselves. And of course, who can forget the DDLJ hat tip in the film? Priceless.
आप बैठे छुटभैया नेता छोटे छोटे बच्चों के साथ नेतागिरी करते हो। अबे अपने क्षेत्र में जाओ, थोड़ा मोटिवेशन दो लोगों को। और कल रात वहाँ थे?
सिनेमा देखने गए थे।
कौन सा सिनेमा?
दिलवाले दुल्हनिया ले जाएंगे।
बेटा, तुमसे ना हो पाएगा। हमें तुम्हारे लक्षण बिल्कुल ठीक नहीं लग रहे, तुमसे ना हो पाएगा।
It isn't only in the Wasseypur saga that we find Anurag's characters to be obsessed by celluloid stars. It actually started with his very first filmmaking attempt. Vijay Maurya's character in Anurag's short Last Train to Mahakali debates whether Bhiku Matre from Satya has more swag than the Anna from Parinda. Bhiku Matre, a character written by Anurag himself for Ram Gopal Verma, and Nana Patekar's Anna, who enchanted the young Anurag. Mahi Gill's character in Gulal is a big Tabu fan, self-obsessed with a facial similarity with the heroine. We hear Ruk 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 playing at her place when she is happy, and later in the film, she vents out her pain in tears with Pani Pani Re playing in the background. The spa receptionist in That Girl in Yellow Boots is similarly fascinated by Kareena Kapoor, always chirping about her on her mobile. And we have Nayak Nahi Khalnayak Hu Main as Faisal Khan's ringtone. Film after film, Anurag indicates how cinema plays a major role in the psyche of the common man, affecting their everyday persona. The human beings of flesh and blood that his films deal with, his characters imitates their screen idols in love and pain. Faisal falls for Mohsina within the boundaries of a cinema hall and later emulates matinee superstars trying to express his emotions. In Mukkabaz, Zoya Hussein's Sunaina urges to her mother that Shravan looks at her the way Ranveer Singh looks at Deepika, in trying to convince her for their marriage. And in Manmarzia, Taapsi's Rumi and Abhishek's Robbie finally break the ice by shouting filmy dialogues from the terrace after getting drunk.
जिए अपनी जिंदगी
हार के जीतने वाले को बाजीगर कहते हैं गांव वालों।
हाय कुछ कुछ होता है राहुल, तुम नहीं समझोगे।
रॉबी।
Not only in one-off reactions, we also have characters in the Kashyap world whose entire life is built on cinema. In Bombay Velvet, Ranbir Kapoor's Johnny Balraj gets so fascinated by the climax of the 1939 classic, The Roaring Twenties, that his whole life revolves around it and eventually converges towards a similar climax. Ranbir's character itself is a reference to Robert De Niro's Johnny Boy from Mean Streets, and naming him Johnny is Anurag's humble acknowledgement. In Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets, De Niro and Harvey Keitel are Johnny and Charlie, both characters wanting to be big shots of the city, very similar to Ranbir in Bombay Velvet. Enthusiasts may also relate Bombay Velvet to Goodfellas, another Scorsese story about a man who wants to make it big. No wonder Anurag acknowledges Scorsese in the movie credits as well. Add to that the much talked about Scarface reference. Ranbir wielding two machine guns much like Al Pacino in the iconic scene from Brian De Palma's Scarface. Perhaps this is which did not work for Bombay Velvet. The film got stuck in between, being a homage to Kashyap's favorite films on one hand, and addition to his Bombay trilogy on the other hand. It was a film as much about shadows, jazz, cigarettes, and the Noir hats as much as about Bombay. One having access to early American or European noirs could appreciate much more about Bombay Velvet that unfortunately is criminally lacking in the Indian audience. Access to past or contemporary works in the international circuit is perhaps the most important part of building an acquired taste in cinema, which we Indians are mostly devoid of. A Sriram Raghavan or Anurag Kashyap, through their intelligent references, provide us insight to that acquired taste time and again. Here's a scene from Gangs of Wasseypur and its reference to another Martin Scorsese masterpiece. Anurag loves Martin Scorsese. Influences of the films he has watched in his own cinema isn't something new for Anurag Kashyap, as we hear him mention it in all his interviews. Last Train to Mahakali, or his first unreleased feature Paach, was influenced by Rafal Zielinski's Canadian film Fun, where the story progresses through multiple flashbacks. Anurag, from his formative years, was more interested in the way of storytelling rather than the story itself. Perhaps the thumb rule for matured filmmaking. The narration of Black Friday was again influenced by Gillo Pontecorvo's Battle of Algiers, where the audience gets into the position of a dumb witness visualizing a historical event in sequence as it actually happened. No smoking. No smoking was a revelation. Perhaps Anurag's finest film, which stands criminally underrated. Here was a surreal movie which never even attempts to provide a clarification to its audience. What swag, what style, unique in the Indian context, hardly done before. The references here weren't limited to cinema only. starting from Kafka references in the overall plot to John Abraham's character named Kay, from Schindler's List to comic bubbles to a female dancer lip-syncing to male voice. What not? Kay's wife asks for divorce as an anniversary gift, to which he answers, "Itna budget nahi hai." Perhaps an inspiration from the up-and-running Daily Mail comic strips by Gray and Shaq. There's a flashback sequence shown as a sitcom with end credits, as we've seen in Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers, another Hollywood favorite of Anurag. He contextualizes all these references most interestingly and blends them in his own way. Say, for the black comedy sequences we find in Anurag's gritty thrillers. Tarantino might very well be an inspiration, but the way Sultan's murder sequence is conceptualized or police station scene in Ugly is shaped, its originality in the best form. The idea of extracting comedy out of violence, as in Tarantino films, still remains, but in a way that the Indian audience can relate to. There might have been an influence of Danny Boyle's train spotting in his depiction of Devdas, or a shot similar to Fatih Akin's car crash scene from Head On. But the Devdas subversion in Devdi is his own. Paro's sudden breakout into physical outburst to contain the inner pain in the hand pump scene in Devdi reminds of a hauntingly beautiful scene from the Japanese anime Graves of the Fireflies. But the context remains unique even if the intensities match. The dancing twins or the Kashmiri brothers in Man Marzia might also remind of the men in yellow raincoats in Theo Angelopoulos' films. Similar characters with no apparent connection to the story in progress. Anurag uses them as anonymous and collective allegory similar to what the Greek author does in his films. And yet, while Angelopoulos is an allegory to the modern societies, Anurag uses them to portray Rumi's dual state of mind. Anurag is always on a trip of his own. It is hard to believe that even in Return of Hanuman, a supposedly children's film, Anurag sets his own crisis contexts. And talking of movie references, Hanuman is all loaded. From Sholay to Titanic, Mission Impossible to Himesh Reshammiya. You have them all. Here's the Hanuman meet Matrix reference. One of the finest influences of Anurag Kashyap's cinema is the use of filters and color. In our video on top 5 Korean thrillers, we had discussed how Old Boy uses color shades as clues in the overall narrative. Anurag, a big fan of Korean cinema, uses color in almost all his films to portray the mood. In Black Friday, the all-around numbness is shown in blue. The blue numbness that engrosses Dev when consuming drugs, or K when he cannot have his smoke. The yellow in Ruth's boots is perhaps her ray of hope in trying to find her father. But when the reality sinks, she too gets immersed in the color blue. Red is the color of pain and rebellion. The Abir color, as the English title of Gulal reads. We see different facets of this rebellion in the characters of KK, Aditya Srivastav, Piyush Mishra in Gulal. And the outsider Dileep Singh, played by Raj Singh Chaudhary, initially retains his own identity amidst the red before getting buried in the red anguish. Red is also the color of the interrogation room in Black Friday, and the tint in Taapsee's hair and glasses in Man Marzia. All rebels with their own unique causes. Anurag Kashyap is a pure cinema addict. His love for the medium is not restricted to his huge DVD library or the Charulata magnet on his refrigerator. From Udan to Haramkhor, Shahid to Lunchbox to Bhavesh Joshi, Masan to Muthun to Abis. Anurag has always backed voices that can put India in the international platform of cinema making, financially or through his connections. The enthusiasm in his voice when talking about Desika, Melville or Gurudutt is infectious, something one can't fake. It's that authenticity of love for the medium which brings in all these references in his cinema, sometimes knowingly and mostly unknowingly. when you use a subversion of Ye Duniya Agar Mil Bhi Jaye To Kya Hai from Gurudutt's Pyasa to be the climax of your gritty political drama, it's just not knowledge but one's love and sense of cinema that speaks, in combination to the deep social awareness. And then on another day, Anurag insists on his self-cameos in his films like a Tarantino or a Subhash Ghai. A man of many moods who acts in completely different films to what he writes or directs. Talking of mood, let's end with another Kashyap reference to one of the finest experimental films from India. Kamal Swaroop's Om Darbadar song, Meri Jaan, an inspiration for emotional atyachar. That's all from us today.
मेरी जा मेरी जा मेरी जा दे मेरी जा तौबा तेरा जलवा तौबा तेरा प्यार तेरा इमोशनल अत्याचार